Hello, my name is Chris Grossmeier. We'll be covering the Modeling and Comparing Cloud Solutions, Cost and Strategy, ARC 213 session for Google. First, quick introduction. My name is Chris Grossmeier. I'm Senior Director of Product for Cloud Physics in Santa Clara, California. I oversee the roadmap, strategy, and the integration of some of the assessment tools used by Google and the partners to help customers do assessments, costing, and planning. Our agenda for today, we're going to take a quick look at analyzing your environment. We're going to see how to assess and discover your workloads, quantifying your data, your TCO, and what's on-premise, and take a quick dive into planning your cloud migration, and then ultimately deploy and optimize, following the basic cloud migration strategy from Google. So before we begin, most important thing I want to point out, find a cloud partner. Most customers are only going to succeed when they have a strategic partner on board who has done this multiple times. Take advantage of that partner, learn from their experience, use their resources, and train your staff up with these solutions. Partners have been enabled to do these services, have direct relationships with Google, take advantage of their knowledge, and help that migration go as smooth and as quick the first time as possible. Also, if you're a partner, take advantage of the funded assessments from Google. If you're a partner or a user, you can take advantage of requesting a fully funded Google assessment to analyze your current infrastructure, do the matching, do the TCO and analysis, and find the best output and solution for your cloud migration strategy. This can save weeks or months for many organizations. So as a partner, you can sign up at the Cloud Physics site and register. And also for new users, you can also request an assessment through the customer portal or from Cloud Physics directly. So as we begin and you start working with your partner, communicate why you're interested in exploring the cloud for migration. Before you can really advance down this journey, what is the reason that you're getting into the cloud to begin with? How will it be used? Production, test, staging, dev. We want to know, are the workloads stateful or stateless? And we can take advantage of some of the dynamics of the cloud. Are you going to take advantage of cloud services, or do you have lots of legacy applications you're bringing over? So are you replatforming and rebuilding? Is there a compliance implication you're focused on? You're trying to keep your workloads all together on dedicated hardware in a secure environment, or are you okay with going to an instance-based scenario, or do some workloads actually really need to stay within your own data center? As well as for compliancy, do you need to keep the patch management and the resources up to date? Is there a business impact for this cost as well? Are we going to gain a OpEx or a CapEx savings? Can we depreciate resources? Can we eliminate some of the costs and the investments that we have on premise? Ultimately, at the end, which tier applications are we bringing over there? Do we need to run our most mission critical application in the cloud to take advantage of disaster recovery and scalability? Or do we want to take advantage of the cloud for elasticity for our developers, our test, and our staging environments, and keeping our workloads contained and controlled by our own organization? So as we begin, the very first step in an assessment in the GCP model is analyze your environment. We want to do a quick look of what we're going to do and sort of define an outcome. Like we mentioned, are we moving to the cloud for a specific reason? Are we trying to save money? Are we trying to move a specific outcome? Are we trying to re-platform an application or just do an application renewal? By defining your outcome, your stakeholders have a clear compass to know whether you're moving in the right direction and which choices you should focus on. Sole tenant instances, Google Cloud, VMware Engine, services, and so on. Those are all going to have a very unique characteristic, and the outcome will really help guide that scenario. As we begin, the financial needs are the first place we want to begin. On-premise, we want to start quantifying the resources on our side first. We'll quantify the cost of the cloud a little bit later, but we need to know, are we looking at all of our resources and what is the cost on-premise? This is going to allow us to do comparisons later in the life cycle. So on-premise, I want to build a TCO model. I want to quantify what are my OpEx and CapEx costs on-premise. And are we interested in doing a pay-as-you-go or on-demand type model where we're paying to keep resources on there and then we're going to shut them on and off, but not getting any significant discounts? Or are we going to commit to a sustained usage or committed use discount for some of the workloads? There is also costs around migration. Are we going to have to re-platform an application, move it onto a new operating system, and spend many man hours of actually testing and migrating workloads? Or can we just do a quick vMotion and bring that workload over to the cloud, knowing that it's going to work exactly as it did on premise? Lastly, changes in the infrastructure in terms of operating systems. If we own our own licenses, can we bring our own licenses to the cloud? Should we leverage standard instances in the cloud available from the cloud provider? Or should we go ahead and leverage a free operating system and change the model by which we're using OSs today? As we begin, a key part of this analysis is to have a migration team. We want to define who are the stakeholders, both at the line of business and in IT and in the partner. Each of you will have an impact on the direction that we move the applications. We define the business stakeholders, and we want to define the architecture team so that as we engage an application, we know why we're moving it. Are we moving it for performance reasons? Are we moving it to take advantage of a certain platform? Are we trying to get closer to our customers? These people are all going to have a say and an input on how we migrate and why we make migration decisions. So part of this TCO analysis and the financial analysis to look at what we have today. We want to understand what is the quantity of resources we have in our data center. What are our servers? And what are the varying costs and age of those resources that we've invested in? Do we have a significant investment in licenses for management? Things like multipath, things like operating systems, things like virtualized storage and virtualized network, or just general enterprise management as a whole. Are we paying for additional services on this platform? Third-party applications that we're using the cloud for today, and are those going to be able to carry over to the cloud, or are those things that will end when we look at the end of our on-premise infrastructure? Also, quantifying the overhead of our infrastructure, power and cooling, square footage, maybe even the cost of staff if some of them are dedicated purely to operational use on-premise. All of these we want to quantify into a TCO type analysis and find out what is the cost of our resources on-premise. Once we've done that, we can actually take this even further, some of the tools, and actually find out what is the cost per workload, what is the cost per VM, what is the cost per hour, per day, per year for an individual workload in our data center. And this is going to be very useful as we start modeling these resources into the cloud model. What metrics also matter is going to be important for us. We want to go through and look at all of our workloads and determine, is there something unique about the characteristics on-premise that we're trying to fix? We want more performance at the disk level. We want to eliminate contention at the CPU. We want to eliminate memory swapping and overcommitted hosts. These metrics that we monitor on-premise and collect data for are something that we want to use as the baseline. So as we get to the cloud later, we can go back and see, have we actually improved our performance and actually improved our experience for our users? By capturing these resources today and seeing where the bottlenecks and the problems are, we can monitor those metrics when we get to the cloud and do that comparison and actually quantify if we've actually achieved a significant improvement in our availability, our performance, or just the day-to-day operations. So once you've done the TCO analysis on-premise, the next part is sort of start planning your cloud migration. We want to look at what are the scenarios that we're going to look at and then use those to build their financial costs. So we can get into a comparison a little bit later. So the first thing to note, and this is a good tip, is not everything can or should move to the cloud. File and print servers, domain controllers. Potentially, if you have large hyper-converged infrastructure, you may have infrastructure for it, such as storage arrays and network components that are virtualized on-premise that don't need to move to the cloud. So take your time, review the workloads that you have on-premise, tag them, manage them, and quantify which ones you really want to move to the cloud, which ones aren't necessary. You may find that there's a large portion of your investment, powered off VMs, resources that are dedicated to on-premise resources that don't need to go to the cloud and can be a significant cost savings. So focus on what you have locally, work on those resources, tag them, and we'll use those for filtering and reducing our scope a little bit later. So in our workload analysis, a key part of what we have on premise is each workload has a defined size. Every application owner has come to you and said, I want 16 or 32 processors, I want 64 gigs of RAM, I want all the storage. Obviously, they have a business need for their request, but the reality is they may not have ever used those resources. So right-sizing the workload is going to be very key. Giving the users the opportunity to reassess what is the ideal size of that workload can have a significant cost savings for us in the cloud. There's no reason to pay for 32 CPUs when the workload has never used more than 4 or 8 CPUs in the on-premise environment. In addition, we want to map these workloads to different instances. As we start doing the analysis, the tools that we want to leverage today, we want to find, every workload and find out what is the ideal workload in that new environment. Right-sizing it first and then mapping it into those resources. So we may find that instead of 16, we can get by at 8 CPUs. Instead of 64 gigs of RAM, we can get by at 24. By mapping these instances after the right sizing, we can now quantify a cost for each one of those base instance types. Storage has an additional level of optimization all to its own. Many workloads on premise have performance characteristics that are limited by the array. In the cloud, we can choose SSD or hard drive or even optimal. So based on the IOPS and the throughput of that specific application, we may recommend that it go to an SSD. If the volume is large enough or the performance is low enough, maybe we can put it onto a hard disk drive. Using the tools and knowing what the metrics are for each workload allows us to dynamically adjust these on the fly. And the end result will have a cost that's optimized for each workload. Lastly, there's some choices that we need to make around how we want to put these on the cloud. Traditionally, we'd always put resources out there as instances in the Google Cloud, where every operating system got its own instance on a shared resource in the infrastructure. But with the advent of sole tenant nodes, we can move our own workloads onto a dedicated host, which is only occupied by our own organization and not shared with anybody else. True advantage of sole tenant nodes also is oversubscription. So if I have a lot of idle or lightly used workloads throughout the month, I can oversubscribe this host potentially up to 4-to-1 and gain the benefit of oversubscription that I couldn't do with individual instances. And lastly, the newly released Google Cloud VMware engine, allowing us to run workloads in VMware on Google Cloud as a dedicated node. Big cost savings to move workloads just with the vMotion from on-premise to the cloud without having to go through any replatforming or any migration. Lastly, what are your deciding factors? Is it time? Do I need to be on the cloud as quick as possible? Is it I need to refresh? Or am I replatforming an application and modernizing my applications? All these are going to be important factors for our workload analysis. As we start modeling, we want to start looking at the characteristics that are going to have an impact for each instance. Choosing a geography will have an impact on cost immediately. So knowing that I have a specific geography in mind, I can move it to wherever I want for the maximum cost savings or have it as close to an end user community that uses an application. I can explore that sole tenant node option, taking advantage of dedicated hosts, and with dedicated hosts, the ability to bring my own Microsoft licenses to the cloud and take advantage of my own software assurance. If you're a VMware customer today and you have a GVCE, or Google Cloud Virtual or VMware Engine option available to you, move those workloads directly into VMware in the cloud and potentially have a significant savings in time and cost of infrastructure. But importantly, we want to understand what our commitments are. As we commit to those resources in time, on demand, or 1 year or 3 year commits, we will achieve different levels of discount for each one of these solutions. Lastly, understand the skills and capability of your team as well. So as I run through this simulation and I'm mapping my workloads to the cloud, if I'm planning to move them into instances or I'm planning to move them to services, is my team or my partner capable of doing that? Or will I gain the advantage of just vMotioning these workloads into the cloud and then learning that skill as we go through them one at a time, but gain the advantage of getting on the cloud as quickly as possible? So big choice, jump all in or go hybrid. If I jump all in, am I going to do one fell swoop and bring it all to the cloud? Or can I run in a hybrid mode where I bring specific applications to the cloud one at a time, keeping some of my resources on premise in my own data center and run those in the cloud as I bring them over? I need to understand what needs to stay, what needs to go. Understand the relationship between these resources is also important. If I have lots of traffic between two VMs, I want to ensure that I bring all the relevant resources with me to the cloud at the same time. So this is where we get into discussion of what options and impact each has. If we adopt Google Cloud Services, we can see a significant savings by taking out the operating system and the instance costs and focusing solely on the service. So adopting Google Cloud Services for Cloud SQL, SAP on Google, Kubernetes, any of the advanced machine learning engines and resources can be a significant cost savings over running instances for you as an organization, giving you true dynamic capabilities. But I may have to do some lift and shift. I may have applications that are legacy applications, Windows 2003, and those resources that I want to bring to the cloud. So do I bring those applications onto new OS instances on the cloud, or do I just migrate that workload? Things like Velostrada streamline that automation for us. Or quickly migrate with the Google Cloud VMware engine. If I have a legacy infrastructure today and time is of the essence, quickly vMotioning those workloads over to the cloud may offer a quick advantage, but ultimately may mean some of these applications remain around much longer than you intend. Ease of bringing it to the cloud doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to end up getting replatformed. When we look at the instance options, we want to look at all the factors that impact our instance choices. We talked about right sizing, and do we optimize those resources? Knowing that an application is multi-threaded and takes advantage of multiple CPUs, right sizing it down may actually have an impact on its performance. So we definitely want to engage with the lines of business and the application owners around this. Optimizing storage for disk type. If we are bandwidth constrained at the disk level, we're I/O and throughput constrained, taking advantage of SSDs in the cloud may give us a significant performance increase, or maybe changing the storage model altogether. Dev, test, QA, all the different staging, maybe they don't need to be on full instances. Moving them to on-demand or preemptive instances could offer significant savings for us and have a big impact on the long-term strategy. Lastly, choosing the right instance class is something we want to start with right away. Focusing on what is it that we need. Do we need an Intel processor for the Intel architecture and the Intel commands? Am I going to go with the latest and fastest Intel processor? Am I going to go with something where I really don't know the underlying infrastructure for cost savings, like an E2 instance? Or maybe I have a commitment to an AMD solution that's in the infrastructure, and I know that I have an AMD processor need. Choosing each of these will have a financial impact cost. We'll reveal that through the tools and the calculations. Sole tenant nodes versus Google Cloud VMware Engine. A strategic choice here is that I can overcommit sole tenant nodes and take advantage of bringing my own licenses over instances. I can do the same with the VMware Engine. But with the VMware Engine, I can leverage my VMware architecture as it is today, take advantage of the VMware tools. But the Google Cloud is going to allow me to do some functionalities very specifically to the cloud without paying for the addition of the hypervisor overhead. If I'm not going to need VMware in the cloud, maybe I don't need to bring it to the Google Cloud VMware Engine. One of the key things, though, of sole tenant nodes and the GCVE is that I can bring my own licenses for the Microsoft solution, where I could always bring my licenses for Linux solutions to instances. The limitations of Microsoft licensing allows me to bring those licenses to those dedicated host models. So big discussion options around optimization and the impact of each. So if we're willing to commit to resources, we want to take advantage of the discounts we can achieve. If we commit to an on-demand instance and the workloads are going to be on a lot, we want to leave them on as much as possible to gain that sustained usage discounts. On-demand and preemptive will gain that advantage for sustained use. But if I'm willing to commit to a year or 3 year, I can get even greater savings with that committed use discount. This is going to apply to all of our instances and convert them into regular instances on the instance model. For the sole tenant node and the GCVE, it's committing to the infrastructure over 1 year or 3 year to maximize that savings. So as I go through these calculations, I want to know all these factors. Did I match the right resource? Did I choose the right storage? Did I choose the right commitment? Did I choose the right geography? All those are going to play into our scenario here. So once we've gone through and played with some of the assessment tools, you're going to have the capability of doing comparisons. We did that early TCO. We modeled what our cost was on premise. We're actually able to find that cost per VM. We're actually able to do that same modeling then against the cloud instance. What was that cost of that single VM in the cloud on a sole tenant node or as an instance? Know your current support services versus future support services. If you have resources and people on site and you're paying for those on premise, how are those going to be impacted if you can cut those costs, or are you going to be picking up additional services on the cloud side? Things like security, logging, load balancing, different concepts of the infrastructure, certificate management, and support all are going to play into your cost model comparisons. Lastly, we want to plan for the disaster recovery scenario. Fortunately for us, Google takes care of the hardware infrastructure for us. Should a host fail, they bring back the resources for us, so I don't need to build an N+1 or N+2 architecture. But I do want to plan for corruption. and loss of data. So planning for a storage and archiving and backup scenario is going to be key as we get to the cloud as well. Once we've done all this, we'll collect all the data through the assessment models. This is where a tool like the Cloud Physics Analysis is going to be critical. We're going to bring all of our content in, and we're going to start prioritizing our migration of components. Now, key tip here, do I move my most critical application first, or move the low-hanging fruit? This should be an obvious one. We want the team to learn by moving some of the resources first. Let them test and learn how the tools work, how they respond. Learn for compatibility, learn for build restrictions, and different builds and versions that are out there that may not be compatible with each other. Let them learn on the platform by bringing that low-hanging fruit, the test environment, the dev environment, before you commit to the larger enterprise. Hopefully, a strategic partner, if they're involved with you, can give you a lot of heads up to a lot of these, but ultimately, you know your applications, you know the limits and the requirements, and testing is going to be really critical for your team to focus on in the early stages. So our last big portion of the planning is going to be deploying Optimize in the Google model. So where we can, we want to use the services. If we have Mail and Exchange on-premise, maybe we can take advantage of Google Mail. If we have Exchange servers on-premise, maybe we can use Cloud SQL. We can take advantage of the services that make the most sense if we can achieve a cost savings. In many cases, if it's an instance today on-premise and you can bring it to the cloud, we can find a similar service that has reduced cost. We want to monitor what you are consuming. What are you using on-premise? What are you using in the cloud? And what was used for certain portions of it? Because your utilization during migration or during peak usage may be significantly different throughout the year. So if you're doing an assessment in the off-season, understand what you're consuming. Optimize resources that make sense. For your small dev test and QA instances or developer desktops, making them smaller because they're idle is fine. But for an application that takes advantage of that multi-threaded environment, has lots of cores, maybe optimization isn't critical as availability and performance. So understand what the business need is before you right size or optimize those resources. A big portion of this is cloud service integration. If I can integrate to a cloud service, or do I want to be cloud agnostic and bring my own OS instances, my own applications? The tighter I get coupled into the cloud, the more savings I may be able to achieve, but the harder it is to move later. Ultimately, Kubernetes and containers, if I'm going stateless or I have a lot of resources that are very dynamic being created on the fly, take advantage of the new technologies for Kubernetes. Allow your environment to use things like Anthos and leverage the container model to really save resources as we move. So an optimization decision points here. So does your staff have the skill set now required for cloud management? If they were strong in the VMware tools, maybe the VMware tools on the cloud makes more sense. If they're really just strong on their core applications and the infrastructure was not their strong point, cloud migration may be a very simple choice for you to make. The cost of migration, lifting and shifting resources to the cloud, or running tools to do a VM migration can be very costly versus just doing something as simple as a vMotion. Right sizing and replatforming is key to the solution, or application modernization is key to the solution. You're going to incur more cost up front. But a vMotion will get me on the cloud and get me over there quicker. Then I can focus on the resources in the cloud and not pay for that inter-region bandwidth type scenarios. Does your cost benefit from sole tenant nodes or shared infrastructure? The more I can oversubscribe, the more I can commit my resources, the better. If I can oversubscribe my host because a lot of my workloads are relatively idle, that's a big cost advantage. But if my workloads are one-to-one for CPUs and I want to guarantee a commitment, again, sole tenant nodes may offer an advantage that I can have my own resource, my own host, not shared with anybody else. But the cost of shared infrastructure may be a negative in that case. And again, operating systems. We've touched on this many times. There is a significant advantage to bringing your own operating systems. If you've already invested in a software assurance and you have a multi-year agreement with a software manufacturer or a license manager for the operating systems, bringing your own license to the cloud guarantees your investment is not lost. It allows you to bring that resource over and reuse it. If you own Linux, you can do BYOL across all instances and all solutions. But BYOL for the Windows environment only applies to the sole tenant nodes and the Google Cloud VMware engine. Last big choice, will free do? You may find that a lot of the free operating systems may be sufficient for what you're looking for. If I don't need an enterprise class Red Hat instance and I can get by with a free Linux version, it may be sufficient for some of your non-critical applications. So some final thoughts: plan, test, migrate, learn, repeat. This is going to be key to the success. Leverage that partner. Go through these steps multiple times. Start with the low-hanging fruit. Bring those resources over the cloud. Learn what works and doesn't, and then repeat and correct. It's going to be an important factor for bringing these resources over. So with that, I'm going to say thank you. Quick final note though, there are resources available from the Google team. There is a great guide for planning your Google Cloud migration. We'll get into all of the assessment models, the tools, and the financial planning portions of it. As well as Cloud Physics does provide a full assessment model fully funded by Google. It's available to all partners to offer to their customers and for all customers to take advantage of directly from Google. Visit the site, learn how to sign up for the assessment, and we'll guide you through both the on-premise TCO and as well as all the cloud modeling for your storage, your compute, and all the new resources that you're looking at in the cloud. With that, I want to say thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference and have a good day.